Welcome to the Veritas podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kelly Lamb. Kelly is a musician, commentator, and a reporter for Rebel News. Kelly, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you back, Kelly. I know you've been on the channel before. You were on the channel when the podcast went by a different name. We are the Veritas podcast now, but in any case, it's great to have you back on. You were so great to have the first time. I want to talk about something very specific today, and that is the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict and trial. This is an event that I think kind of transcends politics and culture in many ways. It was a really big ruling here. For anyone that's listening, Kelly is actually Canadian. Just for context for people, she is not in the United States, but this is a story that is big enough that it has permeated, across borders. And I do want to discuss it today. The way that I want to start the discussion is by talking about something that I think hasn't gotten a ton of attention, which is specifically the sort of psychotic nature of the Twitter leftists throughout this entire ordeal. There's been so much hate and vitriol directed towards Kyle specifically as a person throughout this, despite the fact that the evidence really showed that he did not do anything wrong. And eventually it came out that he hadn't even done many of the questionable things which are not illegal, such as, driving several hours across state lines, as we heard so many times. The amount of vitriol that was thrown towards him by sort of Twitter leftists, way too online people on the internet, it reached a peak when he cried on the stand recounting the story of what happened. And there were, I hate to even have to say this on my show, but there were a lot of jokes about him being raped in prison. Once he went in there by, a number of people. And I don't think it was about comedy or making jokes. It was about the fact that people hate this kid and want to see him suffer, despite the fact that he very clearly did nothing wrong. And when I saw these, grown adults making fun of a teenage boy for crying because he was nearly killed by a convicted pedophile and two other, degenerates whom he had to shoot and kill, regrettably, it just made me want to ask someone like you, who's kind of in my cohort of the reasonable people, what do we do about the fact that we've got a bunch of people running around in the US, in Canada, all across the Western world, who are just broken? They're psychotic. Their brains are broken by politics. They've become something that I can't imagine they were, or at least I hope they weren't until a couple of years ago. What do we do about these psychotic, angry people that are just so full of hate, including in this case for a child?
Well, this is interesting because as a Canadian, I wouldn't normally come across these stories to the extent that someone in America would. But when this happened, when this trial went on, and then especially the last few days, it just blew up all over social media, and I couldn't avoid it whether I wanted to or not. So I really started to dig in and try to understand where this vitriol was coming from. And it reminded me a lot of what happened with the Covington kids. So Sandman, yes, I think was his name. And just the absolute vitriol. And like you said, just the hatred and the stuff that's coming out of people's mouths is absolutely appalling. And I understand it's Twitter, it's a lot of it, there's bots and there's all kinds of people just trolling. I get that it's not all, you can't take it at face value for how society is, but it's a good mirror. And often it kind of gives a glimpse into what's coming, I find. And that's really frightening. And what's happening is this divide where we can't just disagree with someone about an action or a belief or anything else. We've got to demonize their whole character. So it seems like, and of course the racial stuff comes in too. So you have to demonize whoever it is that is sort of the demon of the day. And that seems to be what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse. So you can't just disagree with something about how he went about it, or I wouldn't have done it that way, blah, blah, blah. It has to be, he's a monster, he's a racist, he's a white supremacist, because it seems like that's the only way people can justify their absolute rabid hatred, because that's really what it is, just hatred. And the same thing was happening, if I recall, with the Covington kids. And what the parallels all for me was actually the media and blue check marks, verified accounts, basically saying he has a punchable face and things like that. Just really, really gross. And this is not an older man, like you said. This is a young man who, from everything I've read, you can argue whether you would or wouldn't have done that, or whether you should have an AR. That seems to be the biggest argument. This guy was carrying around an AR and going across state lines, and really things that aren't overly relevant and really have nothing to do with the facts of the case, which I think were very explicit. I watched some of the sadness of the prosecution. And like, I'm not surprised that he was found not guilty, because it was pretty straightforward, I felt. And I'm not even somewhere that really recognizes gun rights. Canada doesn't have much for rights. You can have a firearm, but it's not a right. So I really feel like it was cut and dried. So when I saw the vitriol after that, I couldn't believe it. But then I remembered, oh yeah, ever since Trump, this has all been happening. And maybe it was happening before Trump, but something shifted in the States with Trump, and it really just went off the rails. And now we even have Canadian politicians. So Jagmeet Singh, who is the leader of our, I guess you'd call our socialist party, the NDP, the New Democratic Party, he had to make some comment about how it really feels like it's unfair. And I think the answer, to kind of go into your response, or the response to your question, I don't know what the answer is, but it seems like we've really got to get out of the feels, because we all feel this is unjust, or we feel this is about race, or we feel that this guy wasn't a good example. And the other argument, we feel worried that this is going to give people license to go vigilante shoot people, and all of these sorts of feels. And that's what's really getting us, because the feeling part of it, if you're a Christian like I am, in the Bible, they talk about the heart being very deceptive, because feelings can go anywhere. They can be really good or really vile. And that's what concerns me here, is that this isn't about facts. This isn't about humanity. This is just about feelings. And a lot of those feelings are riled up by the news, by social media commentators, and people are eating it up and at each other's throats. What I didn't have the heart to look at in the States was how bad the riots and stuff were the night of the verdict. So that's what I'm also curious about, is how did that translate into the streets? I've seen a little bit, but I just can't look into all of that right now. There's so much going on.
Very interestingly, from what I've heard, and I was actually watching football earlier today, so if anything's happened in the past few hours, I might have missed it. I was watching football this afternoon at a bar. But from what I've heard, they have been surprisingly restrained. And I have been wondering if, ironically, it might have to do with the fact that it has been made very clear. I mean, there's a number of factors here. One is that Donald Trump is no longer in office and Joe Biden is. And so maybe people are less inclined to riot for some reason connected to that. But another aspect is that this verdict did establish that if you attack somebody, or if you're going around setting things on and attacking or protecting businesses, as Kyle was, he was protecting a car lot at the request of the owners of a car dealership. They have a right to defend themselves. And I'm wording that very carefully, because it's not that they have a right to shoot you. It's that they have a right to defend themselves. That was what was established by this verdict. And I've been wondering if there's some irony in the fact that the rioting has been much more restrained, much smaller in scale after this verdict, as it should be, because people know that it is not going to be tolerated by the most heavily armed citizenry in the world, the United States citizenry. So I will say, from what I know, and I haven't actually followed it super closely this afternoon, but for the past couple of days, there hasn't been a ton of rioting.
That is very interesting, because of course, that's not the case with a lot of the big trials and things that we've seen in the last several years. Even Kavanaugh, that was quite something, right? So, it's good. I guess that's a good thing that it didn't go from what it was online, because if you were to see even a portion or a fraction of what you see online towards this guy happen in real life, it would be disastrous. Because at this point, it's just become Republican versus Democrat and white supremacists versus BLM. Supposedly, it's not. From everything that I can see, I don't know where they got that from, but it's been a year of this. It's been drilled into people's heads. And it's at the point where, much like with Trump, a lot of what he said was totally debunked. There's all of these comments, the good people on both sides comment, things that we're well aware now, we're completely taken out of context. But after a year of being hammered with that, there are a lot of people in your country that still think that he actually said, what they thought he said in the first place. Doesn't matter if it's been debunked. And I find that's really the disturbing theme, is once someone's made up their mind, they're not willing to change it. And when you go online, that seems to be the problem, is nobody wants to change their mind. What would you say the percentage of people online are that want to, actually have their views changed? Pretty small, probably less than 2% or so. I don't know. People go on there. They don't want to have good faith convos. They want to reinforce their beliefs. And in order to do that, you have to demonize whoever it is you're talking to. So whether it's Kyle Rittenhouse himself or somebody who supports anything from self-defense to gun rights to any of the other things that came up in this trial, well, you got to demonize them. And I would concur that you probably are right. People are really, really yappy online, but when it comes down to it, they might not be so inclined to say something to someone's face if they are pro-gun and are armed. I mean, let's be real. I mean, we can't carry or anything here. I know it depends on where you are in the States for things like concealed carry laws, but it's just not a thing up here. We do have self-defense cases in Canada, but they're very different. We don't have castle law. We don't have anything like that. So it's very hard to justify the use of any kind of self-defense here, which can be really difficult in court cases, especially for rural crime and things like that. And so it doesn't seem like there's a lot of incentive because people can kind of do what they want, and there's not a lot of people that are going to stand up and do anything about it. So when you have that incentive to kind of back off, I mean, like you said, it's you have to be cautious how you word it, but yeah, I would think that would be an element that people are maybe considering. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was very funny. There were these memes after the verdict about like Kyle Rittenhouse to defend courthouse after verdict. You know, this idea that he would be standing out there because it is kind of the underlying message is that people have the right to defend their communities and defend themselves. And I think this is a very good thing. Some people in the sort of moderate, left or right spaces were saying that they understood the verdict was correct, but that they were afraid of the effect it could have on vigilantism. I have been making the argument with people that Kyle Rittenhouse was not a vigilante by any stretch of the imagination. He belonged to this community. He didn't seek out criminals to kill or perform a citizen's arrest. He was putting out fires at the request of somebody who asked him to help. He was providing medical attention. He brought his weapon for protection, was attacked in the process of putting out a fire by a multiple times convicted pedophile who God knows what he wanted to do to Kyle once he got his gun. And he defended himself. This isn't a vigilantism case, and I understand people's concerns. I was disappointed particularly in Bill Maher because he's been on a tear lately of, I don't know how big he is in Canada, but obviously a very big commentator here. Bill has been on a tear lately going against the woke, and I've appreciated it a lot, but he dropped the ball on this one for sure. He was saying, I'm afraid of what this will do with vigilantism here. Kyle Rittenhouse wasn't a vigilante. I don't even accept that narrative that, okay, what he did was legal, but it was kind of vigilantism. No, a vigilante is somebody who thinks they're Batman and goes out in the middle of the night looking for criminals to kill, which is, in a moral gray area in and of itself. This wasn't even in that gray area.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting. It wasn't like he pulled a Dexter, that's not at all what this was. You don't have to love the kid, although I don't see what the problem is. People just, I think, honestly don't like guns. There is so much image. They have this image in their mind, whether it's from media over the last year or whether it's just other people that maybe they compare him to. It's like they've decided there's this box and it's like young, white, Republican, although I don't even know what his political stance is.
He is conservative. That's clear from his social media.
But it didn't strike me as a political thing. It struck me as, like you said, more of an issue of community and of riots and of wanting to go in and help in some capacity. But there's this imagery, and maybe it is the scary look of the AR. I don't know. Like, people really do they're very vapid. People don't do well when you have to go dig deeper than surface level. So they have this image in their mind of this big bad, I don't know, white male conservative that appreciates gun rights, and suddenly they've just demonized that person to be, he must have had bad intentions. I think that's what really bothers me, is I'm really seeing a lot of intention being applied to him. Like you said, whether it's when he's crying or whether it's anything that he in the trial, well, it must be blank. And it's always something really horrible. And nobody stops and thinks, well, what would I have felt in that situation? What would I have gone through? Or what if he was protecting me from one of these people? There's protecting one's family and community seems like a no-brainer, and has been throughout time across every culture. I'm not sure why suddenly you're supposed to just sit there and, I guess, let people destroy your community, let people run at you, and then just sit there and do nothing. It doesn't make sense to me. I also find it fascinating, the white supremacy angle that people have gone at this from, which seems to be the big one, this racial injustice. Didn't he shoot white people? Wasn't that a thing?
I mean, the idea, I think, is that he shot white people who were protesting the shooting of a black criminal, but somebody who also, by the way, deserved to get shot, who was pulling a knife on a cop. But but even that, there's no evidence. He's never posted anything online or done anything to suggest he's racist.
That
just doesn't exist. There's just not. They would have found it if they wanted to.
Yeah, he just has not very much melanin. That's really it. It's his only crime in this. And so it just seems like they're always reaching. The media will reach and reach. And now that's the narrative, because that's what we see in Canada, by the way, in all of our papers, mostly state funded papers like the CBC. It's this tragic example of yet another awful injustice in the States against Black people. Like, it's so dramatic. And it has nothing. And if people up here haven't watched, well, a lot of people down there haven't watched any of the trial. I don't consider myself completely well researched in it, but I think I know more than
about 90% of the U.S. population, just right. From any, like, if you literally watched 5 minutes of the trial or 2 minutes of the trial, if you watch just the video of the shooting, you know more than most people know. The video of the shooting is only about 2 minutes long. People are pulling things. There are people, by the way, saying that he shot Black people. That was in a report here in the United States.
I've seen that.
Yeah, there are things that are just factually not correct. This leads to a whole nother part of this conversation that I really want to have with you. And by the way, congratulations being at Rebel News. You are now on the good side of journalism. You know, really looking at things from a heterodox perspective, and trying to do journalism in a way that isn't just pro-regime and propaganda. And I appreciate that. And I wanted to ask you about the way that the media has handled this case, which is that there was absolutely a concerted effort to portray this as a white supremacist vigilante who drove supposedly many, many hours away from his home. But Antioch, Illinois, where Kyle is from, they say he crossed state lines. It's actually on the state line between Wisconsin and Illinois. It literally, you couldn't walk your dog in this town without crossing state lines. It would not be possible. This kid crosses straight lines every time he goes to work because he actually worked in Kenosha as well. All of these details were left out. His father lives in Kenosha. His whole father's side of the family lives in Kenosha. He actually didn't even drive to Kenosha that day. He drove the previous day and woke up in Kenosha that morning. He didn't have an illegal firearm. That charge was thrown out by the judge. There's nothing to suggest that he's racist. There's stuff online. He clearly is a Trump fan. He's a Blue Lives Matter guy. That's very standard establishment Republican rhetoric here in the United States. The narrative that the left, I've compared this case to the Kavanaugh case to some extent, because it has that same feeling of it wasn't looking so good for a minute there, and then it kind of came through at the end because, of course, Kavanaugh was confirmed. And even though Kavanaugh wasn't on trial, it kind of felt like he was. And the thing that I think makes this worse than that is that in the Kavanaugh case, the media was working with limited information. A woman made an accusation that was 35 years old, and no one can prove one way or another whether or not she was telling the truth definitively. I personally don't believe she was, based on what I know about the case, but I don't know that for sure. There is a non-zero chance that Brett Kavanaugh did sexually assault this woman. In this case, there is actually evidence to show that everything the media has been saying, every bit of the narrative, couldn't be less true. What in the hell do we do? Because what I've said after this case is that the media has crossed over from being biased to being evil. The mainstream media has reached a point where they are clearly putting people's lives on the line for their own ratings and personal gain and agenda. They wanted this kid to fry or be put in prison for the rest of his life, and they didn't give a damn if he was innocent. And it was all for their own personal gain. That qualifies to me as evil. So if we have crossed that point, and I see you nodding your head, and I think you generally agree with me on that, what the hell do we do about this evil media machine?
I definitely agree with a lot of that, especially the idea that it is, and that word, you don't want to be hyperbolic, but it is evil, especially when someone is knowingly putting out facts that are wrong and are going to drastically change the social atmosphere or landscape of a country. So this was actually part of what really, quote, red pilled me was a media case about a really high profile, really divisive, racially tense murder that had happened, or I guess it was a self-defense thing, but it came out, of course, as this cold-blooded murder, racially. They put lots of motive in there. They like to infer a lot of motive. That's a big thing with the media. And it was really me going through it, following a court case and seeing that not only were they inferring bias, because the media will often just infer by putting two paragraphs beside each other that have nothing to do with each other, but the way they word it, they sound like they're connected, or they sort of lie by omission. There's a lot of, that you can't really get them on it. You can't say they lied here, or here, but you know what they're trying to say. If you have ears to hear and eyes to see and half a brain cell in your head, you can tell what they're trying to do, right? You're not stupid kind of thing. That's common. But what happens, like you said now, is this even next level evil, which is where there's actual facts that are being missed or just put in wrong. So in this case, I was watching this trial and I had read the 2 hours worth of the judge's info to the jury and everything he told them to take into account. And I'm reading this CBC article side by side 2 months later, long after the facts of the case came out, and they were still distorting material facts from a trial. And I was just thinking, well, then what else has been a lie? What else has been a lie? And that was the big question. So how does that translate into what do we do about this? I don't have the answer because we can't all be doing journalism. Now, I work at Rebel. I'm very blessed to have a job where I can speak truth, and I, have a pretty long chain. They're not about censorship. They're about responsible speech, but still having free speech. We're very free speech oriented, even without a First Amendment in our country. But we can't all be journalists. That's just not everyone's shtick. But I think that we can all work to try to show these blatant lies to the regular public whenever we can. And I don't know if it's going to work. Honestly, I don't, because honestly, Scott, people are so emotional. Like I said, this is all about emotions and feels. And when people are riled up and they want to believe that they're right, it's very hard to convince them they're wrong, because then they have to unravel everything that they know, and it's exhausting and it's scary, and people don't want to do it. But we have to try, and that's the only answer that I can see, is to continuously up the ante on having an antidote. I see the Rebel as an antidote to the dirty smear merchants, as Sargon of Akkad would call the press. You need to have an antidote. You need to have someone that's always sort of countering it. Now, of course, we're up against censorship and we're up against algorithm issues. We don't have state funding. We're all crowdfunded. Same with independent people like yourself. You don't get the what's the word I'm looking for? Nobody's seeing you. You're not necessarily out there in the open like you would be on MSNBC.
You don't have institutional backing. You don't have a certain air of legitimacy.
Yes. Yeah. For all anybody knows, we're just, quote, fringe media, right? And that's the other thing, is the main media will be used to take independent media, and they'll stomp all over them and make them sound crazy as well. So it's a big battle, and I'm not going to say it isn't, but at least in your country, you have free speech. At least you don't have what we're facing right now, which is Bill C-10 and Bill C-32 down the pipe, which would literally start hate speech censorship in Canada and give the government even more power than they already have. So the answer, I don't know, but we need mass citizens speaking up, whether it's sharing stuff, taking the time to dissect, go through, research news articles, show where the blatant lies are, and be willing to share it. But it might not be enough at this point. Social media has got everybody so divided, and the feels are so strong, and the media's done, God, I hate giving them credit. I really do. But at least in our country, they've done a superb job. The propaganda is really well done. And for COVID, for everything else, they have got people so where they want them to be. And it's really, really challenging to get people out of that mindset. Unfortunately, if they want to believe that someone, like you said, like Kyle Rittenhouse, is whatever demon they think he is, they're going to find a way to hang on to that, even if it isn't true. So I wish I had an answer other than keep stepping up. And we need more journalists. We need more people we need more people bringing things like Rebel and Blaze TV and all of these sort of networks. We need more of those. We need bigger networks, more backing. And I think conservatives have to be a little more brave. It's hard to get conservatives together to do anything movement-wise because we're so stubborn and independent. Whereas with maybe leftism, so to speak, and collectivism, it's different. They also play really dirty. And I think a lot of us, I always try to play clean and fair. That's my shtick, but I'm questioning how nice I am in my journalism. I'm trying to reach the middle ground. I'm not even sure if there's a point. Sometimes I question that, how nice do you be? Do you try to cater your speech to get people to listen? Or do you just stand strong and speak truth and spit it out and hopefully people will listen? That I'm still figuring out the balance of, and I wish I had the answer, but I don't.
Lately, I've been I'm the guy telling everybody to get mean. It's funny, Kelly, because you strike me as such a kind person, but man, I'm telling everybody just like, you got to get mean. You got to get brazen. I've been but there is, of course, especially you are an actual journalist. I'm not, I'm a commentator of sorts, not a journalist. That it's just my opinion that the time has come for people to get more aggressive and more mean. But your point is very well taken, that one of the only things we can do, and the thing that we must do, is provide alternative media and independent media as Rebel News is doing, as so many people are doing, the Daily Wire and other sources, some of which are expressly conservative, like the Daily Wire, and some of which are actually genuinely neutral. And either way, that is so important. And it was pointed out to me during the course of this case with Kyle Rittenhouse that it is very possible that independent media saved the life of this young man, because we were the ones. I know that the verdict is, the jury rather, is supposed to be blind, right? They were supposed to go into this. But at the end of the day, if I assume they didn't look at any news, although they were sent home and not sequestered. But at the end of the day, if the only narrative available, I'll put it this way, the funds for Kyle's defense were crowdfunded, and nobody would have donated to his fund had they not believed he was acting in self-defense. The information that let people know he was acting in self-defense was presented by independent media. And he would not have been able to fund the excellent defense he received. He initially actually had two very bad attorneys, and eventually he ended up going with the attorneys that he had, who were excellent and could have possibly saved his life. And it is because of real journalism. It is because of people getting the information out there that was true. And even if that doesn't reach most of the American population, and there's still going to be these protests and this anger and these bullshit statements from the president saying, oh, I'm so concerned about this verdict, which is astonishing, by the way, for the president to speak out against a jury verdict. But even if that happens, at the very least, the rest of us who are looking for the truth can find it, as long as people like you are doing your job at Rebel News, people like Ben Shapiro and others who worked on this story from the get-go, getting the truth out there, are doing it. And, I'm having the kind of discussions I have on my show, like I'm having with you right now. As long as we're doing that, there is hope. So, you're right that as many people as possible who think they're qualified to be doing this need to be doing this, need to be citizen journalists, need to be, it's funny because they always say, if a cop pulls you over, video them because they want to catch a cop doing something racist. Well, you know what? If a pedophile tries to kill you in the middle of a riot, make sure you have a video of it. Like Kyle Rittenhouse, not because he was filming it, but somebody else was filming it. And when the guy tried to hit him with the skateboard and another guy pulled a gun on him, somebody was filming it. So I don't know if those people were citizen journalists. I know that there were some citizen journalists around, one of whom provided testimony, which was not helpful to the prosecution. He was actually a prosecution's witness, but it was not helpful to them, what he said about Joseph Rosenbaum, the first person to attack Kyle. But at the end of the day, that is a very important part of this. So your point is well taken, that is certainly number one on the list, is just make sure you have the facts out there, even if unfortunately 40, 50, 60% of the population isn't going to pay any mind to it. There's 30, 40, 50% of the population that is. Precisely. So it's worth it.
And often, for example, I like to play around on Twitter here and there. I'm trying to focus more on, actually doing good journalism now, instead of just having random convos that really don't go anywhere. But I always like to think it's not about just who you're talking to. It's about what you leave, because you never know who's reading something that you write. You never know who's watching one of your videos, right? Not everyone's going to comment. Most people won't. A lot of people won't engage at all, but sometimes you're just planting seeds, really just trying to drop that thing, because that's what it was for me. It was multiple seeds planted and then an aha moment with Jordan Peterson. But it was because of people that stood strong and continued to spew facts no matter what. And they just kept doing it. And no matter how much my feels got hurt or my feels reacted, I couldn't deny the rational part of it. And there's a lot of irrational people out there you're never going to get. But there's a lot of people in the middle that are rational, that just haven't been presented with the facts, because they're just maybe what we would call, quote, normies, people that aren't really as interested or, as obsessed with politics as people like us, that just can't get enough of it and constantly, we breathe and eat and dream about it kind of thing. But a lot of people are just trying to get through their life, and all they see is whatever random stuff comes up on Facebook, or like you said, some comment from the president, which really was inappropriate. We've had that issue. The same case I brought up, the same trial that caused me to sort of change my views. Same idea. There were people in federal office that were making comments. It was completely inappropriate. So all of this is very important, that we are, like you said, getting this info out there. But you also mentioned something which was interesting, which was the crowdfunding for legal fees. And that's something that I really like about what we're doing at Rebel too, is that we don't just do journalism, but we're also working alongside a registered charity and dealing with actually helping people fight COVID fines, help people fight the vax mandates up here. We actually are willing to put our money where our mouth is, and we crowdfund for people who don't know how to help, because because a lot of people watching say, okay, well, I'm not going to make a podcast. I'm not going to do this. How can I help? What can I do? Well, there's a lot of legal funds. There's all kinds of lawfare ways to help as well. And that's, I think, something we're going to have to see more and more. And I think when it comes to journalism, we do need more people calling out libel and slander and taking these people to court, like what happened with Covington. These companies, these outlets, they need to bleed out money. That's unfortunately sometimes the only way that they're going to get held accountable. So yes, have an antidote. And then also, if you can, find ways to support anybody that's standing for truth in a legal manner of all of this, because it's really, really important. And also, the more that you speak out, the more that you give. What was it, Breitbart, that said something about walking towards the fire and giving people, showing people that they can do it too. It gives people courage. So it's kind of multifaceted.
Yeah, it's so, what you said about, I'm very excited about the potential for legal action here. You're right that is one way that we can fight back. Nick Sandmann, who you were referring to in the Covington Catholic High School case, successfully, it's an unknown settlement, but CNN had to pay him something. And I'm guessing it was a lot of money, because CNN has a lot of money and they had really messed up their coverage of him. And Kyle Rittenhouse has anywhere from 2 to 10 times the potential to be suing the shit out of people here in the United States. I mean, Sandmann was called a racist, but he was never charged with a crime and his life wasn't really on the line. Rittenhouse was, at numerous points, he was actually called a murderer. And I wasn't sure if that was happening, and I've gone back and checked this weekend. Many people referred to him as a murderer, and have, in some cases, actually continued to do so after he was acquitted. That is factually untrue, especially after his acquittal. And I am very hopeful that I'm nervous, because he is an 18-year-old boy, and so his ability to navigate this world will be a challenge for him. But I know he has very good attorneys. I know that, his mom is very supportive of him. And I'm hopeful that with some help, he can really score some points in that category. Because one thing I noticed on this note is that CNN's coverage of this story changed after he was acquitted. So leading up to it was the very, very basic, like, here's the left-wing narrative that this is a racist murderer or whatever. They actually did a very measured, neutral report on his acquittal after it happened. And I couldn't help but notice that shift in tone. And I wonder if they're afraid of getting sued, as many people seem to think they are. And they also had his attorney. I want to credit CNN for having his attorney on the show. Chris Cuomo had a very good conversation with him that I found very enlightening. It was good journalism from CNN. And I don't say that very often. But that is something that I'm glad you brought up, because it's got me a little giddy, to be honest. The idea of people just like I was when I learned that Nick Sandmann, had a big bag of money waiting for him, courtesy of CNN. I'm hoping that Kyle Rittenhouse, it's not that I want him to just make off with a bunch of money. It's that I want there to be accountability, right? That's an important part of the solution here. Is there going to be accountability for lying in such a manner as a broadcaster, not just a regular person, but a broadcaster lying in a way that could cost a young man his entire future and life? And if we can hold them accountable in the court of law and in their wallet, then that's an effective way to do it. That's what they care about at the end of the day, ratings and money. Precisely.
And we can talk about the morals and ethics of it all day long, but they don't care. If they cared, they wouldn't have done this in the first place. So ultimately, it comes down to, you have to hit them where it hurts and set a precedent so that this doesn't continue to happen. And I think that really is probably one of the only ways to do it. Provide alternatives for people to give their money and time to, and deal with the law where you can. I think there's sort of, I don't know how true it is, but I know growing up, there was always this idea that the States was more litigious than Canada. And there's probably something to be said about that. But I don't know. I would tend to agree. I'm going to say, as a Canadian, go for it. Like you said, sue their pants off. I mean, what else can you do at this point? There needs to be accountability. This is getting ridiculous. And oftentimes they'll put something out there that's a lie and they'll retract it. I recall when I ran for politics in 2019 that a journalist had called and asked me some questions about someone who'd made a comment about free speech. And we were chatting about it. And he was asking good faith questions. That actually never ran. So I'm curious if I was just too nice and he didn't want to, I don't know, maybe he didn't have anything good to smear me with. I'm not sure. But he asked me why I had such a hard hard feelings against journalists. Why did I have such distrust? And I said, you guys put things out, not you guys, just some people, maybe you're great, but a lot of people put this fact out and then, well, we can correct it later. Well, unfortunately, the after the fact notation doesn't mean anything. You've already planted things in people's mind. And it often seems that that's the purpose of it, is to give people an idea. Like you said, in an ideal world, this trial would be done by a jury that's completely unbiased. But when there's this much media coverage for a year, and when there's this much of a narrative put out in the beginning, it's very hard as a human to separate those thoughts and feelings and images when you're trying to unpack it all. So the media has a big responsibility. They have, in this case, they had the guy's life on their hands, but they also have the societal fabric to some extent on their hands, right? Like, this is about how people will treat each other and how racial relations will go forward, which are pretty precarious right now because of the media, mostly in the States. You guys have your history, but heaven forbid I say that you've come a little bit farther than you were, 100 years ago. It's like you can't even say that there's an improvement in racial relations without people getting upset. Well, no, it's really bad. Well, it's bad because you're making it bad. It's bad because the media wants everybody to hate each other, so it seems. So yeah, if you can hold them accountable, whether it's easier, it's probably easier said than done. These types of legal cases are tricky. I understand with like libel and slander, it's harder, but I don't think it's hard to prove when there's full out lies. Like you said, it's not just bias, it's full out lies now. So
yeah, I am really excited to see what happens with it. We'll have to wait and see. I know that for my listeners and for you, Kelly, if you don't know about this, apparently Kyle Rittenhouse will be on Tucker Carlson tomorrow. He's, whatever you think of doing an interview a few days after you were acquitted of murder, I kind of have mixed feelings about that personally, but he's going to do an interview with Tucker Carlson, and I assume that this will come up. And I actually learned, I think my listeners would be very interested in this, so I'll just mention it very quickly. There was a documentary crew from Fox News, I think from Tucker Carlson's team, that was embedded with the legal team of Kyle Rittenhouse, unbeknownst to the public. And it has since come out that there will be a documentary on this trial that was, filmed in real time, that eventually will be released. So I don't think Kyle Rittenhouse and his legal team are going away, and we may get some answers on, what are they going to do about the fact that this case was misrepresented. This case was lied about. I think misrepresented does not reach the level. This case was lied about, and this young man was smeared as a Nazi murderer. I mean, literally, I laugh when I say it because it's so cartoonishly over the top, but it is what they called him.
Yeah.
But I know we could talk about Kyle Rittenhouse for 3 hours, but I know that there's some other stuff we wanted to discuss, but I'm glad we got to talk about it. And I'm sure that it'll continue to come up on my show and for years to come.
Yes.
But I wanted to talk to you about something I know you're very passionate about with what's going up there in Canada, and that is COVID restrictions. This is something I haven't talked about a ton on the show, and I thought I would this week because I know you happen to be very passionate about this topic. You have, libertarian leanings and you're a pro-freedom person. I know that's kind of a generic way to say it, but I know this about you from what I know about you. And I know that the restrictions in Canada generally have been even worse than in the United States. And what I wanted to ask on this note is how did people become so obedient? Because what I have found is that early on there was this rhetoric about these are emergency powers being used for a temporary period to stop the spread of a deadly and highly contagious disease. It wasn't a non-starter as far as I was concerned. This was a legitimate argument to make, was that you're going to use emergency powers to stop a highly contagious and deadly disease, and that it would be temporary. It was 2 weeks to slow the spread, which became 2 months to slow the spread, which has become 2 years to slow the spread, which might become 2 decades to slow the spread. Let's see. The year will be 2030 and we'll still be slowing the spread. What has happened is that whereas someone like me, I wasn't immediately, some people immediately were like, I'm not wearing a mask, I'm not getting a vaccine. And I understand that perspective. I did get vaccinated. I generally have worn a mask when I'm mandated to do so, but my patience has worn thin. I am not getting a booster until they stop telling me to wear a fucking mask because they told me when I got vaccinated that I wouldn't have to wear a mask, and I do. So I'm not getting a booster until that is settled. And also, because I know they're going to ask me to get like 9 boosters, and I'm not going down that road. And also, this seems to drag on to the point where I know many people who are left-leaning who were very amenable and conciliatory, as I was, to getting vaccinated, wearing a mask when they thought it was medically necessary, and who, particularly since the vaccines, have lost their patience. But there is also another group of people who are like, tell me what to do. I'll wear 3 masks. I'll get 9 boosters. I'll get a shot every day if you ask me. And that's the group I want to ask about, because the one group is we're talking about sane people who understand that this can't go on forever. That's great that we have people like that on the left and the right. I want to ask you about this cohort of individuals in the United States and Canada. We have them here. I know you have them there, who just seem to be so obedient, and they don't seem to have any sense of suspicion about what their government is doing. It's like whatever the government says, they just do it. They're like, tell me, daddy, what do I do? Who the hell are these people and where did they come from? It shocks me that people will do these things they would never have done under other circumstances. If somebody comes up to you and says, I need you to stay inside for 2 years and wear a mask all the time, generally speaking, you'd be like, I'm not doing that. Why do these people do this so far past the point of the emergency powers, 2 weeks to slow the spread kind of period? Why is this dragged on so long? And why are so many people going along with it?
Well, I'm not a psych expert or anything, although I find this psychologically absolutely fascinating. And it would be more fun if it wasn't ruining everybody's lives. Yeah. But it's interesting from a psychological perspective. I'm much like you. I really didn't die on the mask hill. I didn't go as far. I didn't get vaccinated for my own various reasons. But for the most part, I didn't feel the need to battle every single restriction from the get-go. Like you said, it seemed reasonable at the beginning when we didn't know what we were dealing with. COVID was pretty creepy coming out of the gates, right? Who knows? And I get that. If anything, in our country, we didn't do enough for federal borders right off the get-go because they called anybody racist that said that they might be concerned about something coming over from China. They throw racism in wherever they can. Let's admit that. Doesn't matter whether it's Rittenhouse or COVID. What racist, right? Whatever they can say. So I'm like you. I didn't need to fight it from the get-go, but everyone has a breaking point, and mine was probably sooner than a lot of these people that you're talking about that just seem to think that we can go further. We haven't done enough. Let's just cut. You know what? Let's just put all of the unvaccinated in a gulag. Whatever it takes, just doesn't matter. And it's that meme, that "govern me harder, daddy" meme with all the needles.
That's a good way to put it.
That's sort of how I feel about all of this. It's a joke, but it's not really a joke. And yeah, there's definitely lots of those people in Canada. I would argue more than in the States. There's lots in the States, but I think if you were to look at a relative percentage, there's more here. And I don't know why that is. The only thing I can think of is the States was born out of rebellion, right? It was born out of a very liberty-minded group of people. Canada just stayed with the Queen, right? We still have the Queen all over our money. We still have, the Queen's, we've got the crown on our crown land. That's what public land is called. We have it on our money. We have it on our RCMP offices, etc. So I don't know if we just didn't get the memo on, the whole "don't tread on me" memo that the state sort of was built on. I feel like that's where the discrepancy is in how many people here versus there are okay with what's happening. That said, it's the same mentality, and it's happening in both countries, more in certain states I've noticed in the US. But what I'm noticing in Canada, and I don't know how it is there, but all the conservative provinces that I thought would be the least trusting of the government and the most critical of these actions and restrictions, they're acting just as tyrannical as all of the left-leaning governments in our country. So we're having a lot of trouble up here with the constant movement of goalposts, kind of as you said, like it never stops. They keep lying and then changing the narrative, and then they say, well, the science changed. Well, they don't ever say what happened to make them change their mind. They just keep changing the policies, keep changing the goalposts. Why aren't people realizing this? Same reason that I think that people are acting the way they are about Rittenhouse. Feelings, right? It's all about feelings. And what feeling has the media elicited in people over the last 2 years? Fear. Fear of COVID, fear of other people, fear of those biohazard unvaccinated family and friends that are going to come for Thanksgiving. It's always fear, but never fear of the right thing, which is fear of government control. And I think what scares me, and I've been asking this question a lot lately, I'm not so much, I'm horrified by our government of what they're doing to us, but I'm much more horrified by my friends, family, neighbors, regular people that are okay with the fact that the government is doing this to us and are okay with more. Give us more. We need more restrictions, whatever it takes to make me safe, or give me the illusion of, quote, feeling safe, because it doesn't matter how much data comes out about anything from vaccines to masks. People just, they won't listen. They're in this mode. I've got to be safe from COVID-19.
It's like a trance. Because the death counts are so low at this point. I just don't understand. The science just isn't there.
Nothing is making sense. And here's the other problem is, in a place like Canada, we have some of the highest vaccine uptake rates in the world, but we are being told we need more. We have low vaccine rates. And in Saskatchewan, we're made fun of as having low vaccine rates. We don't have low vaccine rates. We have over 70% of the population and over 80% of people above 12. That's a very, very high vaccine rate, as well as all the people with natural immunity. No, it's not enough, not enough. It's just never enough for these people. What was it supposed to be? 70% was the goal in my province. When we get 70%, people can stop wearing masks and we're going to change everything. But they leave that last bit open, wording wise, based on the numbers, based on whatever they decide. And then they just keep changing it. And everyone's like, well, that's just what we got to do. Well, that's the rule. Well, that's the law. And it's appalling to me. I've never seen people just blindly follow and not question. I've never seen anything like it, Scott. I honestly think it's like people are in a strange cult, or like they've worshipped this. They worship the vaccine and Fauci and all of these things as like an idol. Etsy, I don't know if you know about Etsy. It's like an app for art and
yeah. I've actually purchased things on Etsy.
Yeah. So if you go to Etsy now and if you just type in Dr. Fauci or vaccination,
the amount of
things, like he is a god to people. They're putting him on like saint candles, or the vaccine status being. I don't care if someone gets vaccinated. Good for you. Whatever. Do what you do. Make a decision.
The Fauci thing is so creepy.
It's so
it's so bizarre.
And here it's like that too. They're just obsessed with I don't think we put Dr. Tam on a candle. God, that'd be an awful looking candle. But anyway, people are just, they've lost their minds. They've lost their damn minds. And I don't know what to say. It's like a cult mentality, because they just believe that whatever the government says is fine. And that's what freaks me out, because I'm not sure what happens in Canada or the States where we believe we're immune to tyranny. I don't know why we believe that. Is it because we just don't think it can happen here? We've watched it happen all over the world throughout history. If you know any history, even just basic level, like grade 10, barely passed it, but I sort of learned a few things, history, you know that tyranny can happen. And I don't know what makes us immune. Human nature hasn't changed. And it's not a skin color thing, and it's not a location thing. So what is it? Why don't we believe that this can happen? And I don't know what it is. Is it people that are benign and they would never hurt someone else, so they don't believe that the government could hurt them? I'm not really sure. I've been trying to figure it out. Best I can figure is fear really did, like, the propaganda worked. It was a psyop and it worked. That's kind of the only thing I can think of, because people are somewhere else. They're gone. Like, they're so far gone, and people that I thought were really rational. And I think that's the most disappointing part of this. So I wish I had an answer, but I don't know. I'm at a loss. I laugh, but I'm actually more banging my head against the wall than anything.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up a few points here about how people are in this trance in this other world, and they're completely, it's inescapable for them. They're unshakable. And I'm very glad you brought up the Fouchy worship, because what I've been realizing, a quick note for my listeners, I don't know how much, I just heard my cat snore very loudly. So if anyone hears cat noises, that's what that is. But here, I'll just do for the audience real quick. For those of you watching on YouTube, there he is. Anyway, sorry about that, folks. I'm glad you brought up the Fouchy worship, because there seems to always be a sort of pseudo-religious aspect to these phenomenons. Because I was thinking about the Fouchy worship in the context of who else do we know that has been treated like Tony Fauci, who is somebody who is inexplicably worshipped because they are sort of the figurehead of some kind of progressive crusade? Robert Mueller. You remember the Mueller report? He was treated identically. We had our Robert Mueller bobbleheads and our Robert Mueller candles and our Robert Mueller Christmas carols on SNL about how we wished people a Mueller Christmas and that he would drop the Mueller report and prove, which, by the way, the Mueller report, which has been, I mean, the Mueller report wasn't disproven, because the Mueller report actually ended up kind of disproving the Steele dossier, which was and now the Steele dossier has been even more disproven by the, I'm forgetting the Durham investigation, the Durham probe. And so Mueller was the figurehead of this almost pseudo-religious trance that people were in, to the point where they're singing Christmas carols about Robert Mueller. I mean, this is fucking crazy. I mean, I actually try not to curse so much on this show, but like, these are things that call for an F-bomb. Like, this is fucking crazy that people
if there was ever
singing,
a time.
singing songs about Robert Mueller and how much you love this man who ended up not even producing what you wanted him to produce. To his credit, by the way, he ran a legitimate investigation and found jack all, because there was nothing there. And then, of course, you had George Floyd, who ascended to sainthood. You had Christine Blasey Ford, who ascended to sainthood. And then now you have Tony Fauci, who has ascended to sainthood because of COVID. He sort of did so almost simultaneously to George Floyd, actually a little bit earlier. But you just have these situations, and now you actually almost see it with the victims of Kyle Rittenhouse, just to bring it full circle. And it's very funny in that instance, because the victims of Kyle Rittenhouse, we have, okay, let's see, we have our convicted pedophile, our convicted woman beater, and the one who survived, I think, is just some Antifa guy who has a history of firearms related offenses. But not a great guy, because we know he tried to kill Kyle Rittenhouse, aimed a gun at a 17-year-old boy's head. So these people who ascend to sainthood for either no reason, or even more hilariously, when they are clearly not good people, and it's hard to understand why, they are emblematic of, I think, maybe our answer to this question. Why are people so obedient when it comes to COVID? Because they're trapped in a sort of religious trance. I mean, they have a dogma. It's sort of, I guess, at the end of the day, the boring answer. And I don't know if you'd agree with this or if you think there's anything else, but my answer is, what I'm leading towards is, it's the same as every other generic, leftist creed, whether it's anti-racism or feminism or trans activism. The COVID religion is just another way to wear on your sleeve how good of a little, cleric you are for this weird religion that we have. And the idol worship that you referenced with Fauci in particular, I think is such a great example of how weirdly culty, religious is almost too nice of a word. It's how culty it is.
Culty is a better word, yes. And often social justice stuff is very culty. It often sort of replaces religion for people. So it's interesting how in COVID, which really isn't political per se, and I want to bring that up because I think it's important to note that what makes COVID interesting, especially here, and I'm sure there as well and elsewhere in the world, this is one of those weird sort of does transcend politics. Generally, yes, if you're right-leaning, you're going to be less likely to trust the government and more likely to be an independent thinker, fine. But there's a lot of leftists that are, or at least I would say, as I've mentioned, normies that aren't really very political, but would be considered kind of hippies, left-leaning. I used to work in a natural health store, so I know a lot of these people that don't want to take Advil or Tylenol because they don't want to take any, quote, chemicals in their body, right? There's people that say won't take the vaccine or don't want to, kind of just destroy all of the small businesses and stop seeing people because they believe in the importance of our soul and the health of our mental health and our emotional health and, being with family and all of these things as well. So what's interesting about the various COVID mitigation strategies, whether it's vaccines or masks or restrictions and lockdowns, is that I do feel like there is, at least against the lockdowns and stuff, there's more of a diverse group of people fighting against it because it's a little bit of everything. Some people have bodily autonomy concerns, some people have health concerns, and then there's all of the political layers as well. So that's the one nice thing about this is it's less, quote, left versus right than a lot of these other big sort of movements and issues have been. That said, the mentality of what I would say sort of defines left versus right is very, very evident here. And just that automatic, non-questioning, trust the government, that lefty kind of mantra, it does seem to be more culty than usual because it's not just trust the government, it's let them lie, let them walk all over you, let them change the goalposts, let them belittle you, let them trample on your rights. And then not only do you accept that, you also have to love it. Like you're supposed to idolize these people. And it's pretty gross. And what I think is the creepiest part of this is they've successfully, and that's what makes it so culty, is in cults, often you hear about in the slow process, I guess, of, what is it, boiling the frog or whatever, people sort of push away their family and friends. They're told that it's their family and friends that are wrong, that they're holding them back, that they're bad, they're this, they're that. And this cult, this way of life is the true path for you. And that's kind of what it feels like has happened with COVID. It's people that would normally trust their neighbors and their friends and their family have decided, not only do I not trust you, I now trust the government, which I just find is so strange and so concerning. And that's where I do feel like it is a bit culty, and it seems to be replacing, from a faith perspective, to have this much faith in Dr. Fauci, Theresa Tam, a vaccine, and like no faith in God at all. That's really interesting too. So from a religious perspective, it really brings up a whole struggle from what a Christian would view as an idol. Like it really has become, the vaccine has become an idol. It can't be questioned. It can't be, mocked. It can't be anything. It is perfect. And if you do not say it's perfect and can fix everything and make our lives better, period, then you're a terrible person. It's pretty scary stuff. Like how do you combat that? Right. And I'm not sure, again, the answer to that, but it does seem to be the same mentality as sort of replacing religion in people's lives. And it's just this idea of staying safe, and whoever keeps us safe will worship. That's kind of what it feels like. But it's not even real safety. It's fake safety. It's an illusion. And I think that's the sickest part, is watching everyone get duped over a lie.
And the ritualistic aspect of it has been so bizarre to behold. I'm remembering now, you had, I mentioned We Wish You a Mueller Christmas, the classic Christmas song, We Wish You a Mueller Christmas, but there was, did you see the Stephen Colbert band's rendition of Vaccine? Which I assume is the name of the song, because it was the only word in the song was vaccine, to the tune of Tequila.
As a musician and a parody person, that was heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's right. We worked on a parody together, which I like to think had a hell of a lot more effort put into it, because I didn't understand what I was watching. For those listening who maybe aren't aware, if you look up like Stephen Colbert Vaccine song, what you'll find, and I think he's done numerous renditions of it, but there's one that is based on the Mexican song Tequila. If you've heard that song, that's the song I'm talking about. But instead of saying tequila, and this is very clever, people, they say vaccine.
It's not even the right amount of syllables.
No, it's not. And that was what made it sound so strange. And for those listening at home, if you haven't seen this, you have to see it, because it speaks to what Kelly was just talking about, which is the vaccine and the COVID restrictions have just become these transcendent godlike concepts to people, to the point where, I mean, look, like I said, I got vaccinated. I didn't take a fucking vaccine selfie, for God's sake. Like, I didn't celebrate it as if I'd done some incredible thing. I did it because I thought it would protect me from COVID, and I'm glad I did it. I don't regret doing it. I understand that science has shown it does lower your chances of being hospitalized or killed. I'm glad that I have a lower chance of being hospitalized or killed, but I didn't wear it on my sleeve like some kind of badge of honor. And I don't, I don't assume anything of anyone who chooses not to get the vaccine. I'm sure there are some people that are crazy and they don't get any vaccinations because they, and I know, and that's a whole separate issue here in the United States, is that we end up with like smallpox outbreaks because of people who are just very anti-vaccine. Right, but then there's people who've made a choice. We had the whole thing in the United States with Aaron Rodgers, which was very big. Do you know about, there was a football player who,
I did hear about
and he ended up, that was funny just because he was talking about like, oh, my friend Joe Rogan, which immediately set people off. But all of this is to say, the song on Stephen Colbert, I think, is one of the best examples. I know it's silly, people, but you got to watch it, because it is one of the clearest examples of it's like, this is the stuff they want you to want. This is the stuff they want you to clap your hands for, as if there's is Stephen Colbert singing the word vaccine to the tune of the word tequila. That is to them a good idea. They think this is entertainment.
Apes. I think they think we're eight. Like I don't know what there was another one, and I don't recall the artist, and I'm not really like hip to the fly with newer pop music and R&B and rap, but there was some artists that kind of got together to do another one of these songs. I don't remember the name, but maybe you can recall it. I believe it was like in the streets of New York City, and there's a whole musical and they're dancing, and they've got Fauci on it was quite a production. Equally as cringy, but at least sort of creative. At least there was some creativity. It was so cringy.
It was a collaboration between a few people. That was, I think, on the James Corden show, who is another late night host. And he had brought in like Ariana Grande. He had actually brought in some actual musicians. He had brought in some actual musicians and actors to do cameos in a song that was it qualified as an actual song. Like it qualified as something that was created and took some musicianship. I can hear my cat snoring louder, which is very funny that I just want to remind people.
My cats do not snore. My pug snores. My cats
He is here, and that is why you might be hearing this gasping noise, which I promise everyone is normal. It's just the way he sounds. But back to what we were saying. And again, apologies to the audience. Usually my girlfriend is around to wrangle the cat, but she's out of town this week. So it's me. It is Scott Veritas featuring Eisenhower and Kelly Lamb. I have a third chair here today. Yeah. In any case, it like you said, they really treat us like less than children, like apes. Because I don't know a single child who would be entertained by the vaccine song. Like it really it really is at the level of like treating us like animals. And I think that we can bring it full circle to the level of media bias and the lies that they're telling us, which are so obviously false, the things we're asked to believe. We're just at a point where, and the sad part is that there are, I mean, Stephen Colbert has a lot of viewers. Like there are people who will go along with this stuff.
That's just it. I think that that's the unfortunate part is we think it's silly, but is it though? And people do like it. And I do think there's a dumbing down of society going on. And when we were talking about how do you handle all of the media stuff and what do you do with we were talking about this before with Rittenhouse and everything else. I know a lot of people I've talked to that are more conservative content creators are trying to get into the world of TikTok and shorts and Snapchat and all these things that younger generations are into. A lot of stuff. I did some social media training last year around this time, and they talk about like you have 5 to 7 seconds to really catch someone's interest. People have really short attention spans right now. They like flashy. They like a little bit crazy. It's like you almost have to play that part. And I don't like that because I like, listening to 3-hour Jordan Peterson discussions and long podcasts, but most people don't. Most people don't have the attention span anymore. It's really sad. So I think what a lot of these little culty things are doing is they are appealing to people's baser instincts and they're not going too deep into the intellect. A lot of it's just, oh God, they're giving marijuana away and donuts and the perks of some, like they're giving ice cream to kids to give them vaccines in Canada. So I don't know. It's just
bribes.
It's really, it's like bribery and shallowness, and it's sort of appealing to a part of our nature that I don't think is positive at all. And yet apparently people that question this are the ones full of misinformation, but I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's in a very weird place, and my hope is that we'll be out of it soon. I have made a deal with my government that I will consider getting a booster shot when they take away the goddamn mask mandates. That is when I will even consider getting that damn thing.
Well,
and
it makes
I'm
you wonder,
hoping,
like, weren't you supposed to be able to after the second, or wasn't it
so
after first?
so where I am, I live in I don't always, I probably have before, but I always try to avoid saying exactly where I live on the show just because I don't want to deal with people finding me or whatever. But where I live, I'll just say that there was a mask mandate which was removed after the vaccines made our numbers go down, and eventually a mask mandate was reinstated and is currently in place. I guess that kind of narrows it down for those of you who are trying to dox me, but whatever. But dox away. There's currently a mask mandate one way or another. So we had it, and then it was gone, and everyone was like, yay, no mask mandate. And I'm going to restaurants, no mask. I'm going to the grocery store, no mask. It was awesome. Well, the first time I walked into Target with no mask, I was like, oh, this is so great. And now I go into Target with a mask on because I'm legally required to. And so, yeah, it's just, and the fact that we're going back and forth when the death numbers are so low, because my understanding is, yes, the cases went back up. I understand that, but the deaths are not really going back. They went up a little, but the proportion is so low. And what we were told, to bring it full circle, was that this thing is deadly and contagious, and that's why we need it. Well, it's not really deadly anymore. Like, it's not killing a lot of people, and so the justification just isn't there. But Kelly, I think we're at about an hour, and unfortunately, this is one of those times. Yeah. Usually, when I schedule these, I actually have like a good chunk of time. This day, I actually have to hop off around 6:00 here. Yeah. So thanks for coming on the show, Kelly. I'm glad that we got to chat about this stuff, and I'll definitely have you back on at some point. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. Thanks again for collaborating with me, by the way. Anyone who's interested in Kelly's work, I'm going to ask her in a minute to tell you, where to find her. But we did a parody song together called It's Antifa that is on my channel and hers that I'm very proud of. And I just think it's a great little tune. I'll mention that since we were talking about you. I'll say this. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What do you think is a better song? It's Antifa by me and Kelly Lamb, or the Tequila Song by Stephen Colbert? That's what I want to hear from you guys in the comments. I want you to listen to both and compare the two of them. So thanks again for collaborating with me on that, and for coming back onto the show. But before we sign off, let people know where they can find your work. I know you're at Rebel News now. Let people know what you want them to take a look at.
Sure. Well, first I'll say, if you prefer the It's Vaccine Tequila Song to our Antifa song, then I think that you should block those people. I don't think those people need to be in your circle.
Agreed.
That's my theory. And I don't blog many people. But yes, as for me, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure. Happy to come on again sometime and chat about Canuck things. The issues are different in Canada, but they're not, not when it comes down to the nitty gritty, and not with social media, because it's all kind of the same. As for me, you can find me. I do have a channel. I don't put much on there individually anymore because Rebel keeps me busy, but I do have a channel on YouTube under Kelly Lamb. You can check out some of my old work. I've talked about everything from social stuff to COVID to I talked about the Kavanaugh case back when it happened. So that's on YouTube. You can also check me out on Twitter. So that's at Little Goat CR. And you can check me out at Rebel News. So that's rebelnews.com. And there's a journalist page and you can kind of keep track of everything I'm doing. So I am the reporter for the Saskatchewan Prairie region and I cover some other stuff. So that's kind of my shtick. And I will put some more music on my channel. Eventually, I recovered from some surgery in June and just have been trying to keep my head above water. So yeah, that's a little more about what I'm up to. And if anyone wants to check it out, by all means. But thanks again for having me. I appreciate it, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Kelly. And thank you to everyone for listening to the Veritas podcast today. If you're listening on iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you all next time on the Veritas podcast.